Welcome back, class. We are now in Chapter 2. Successfully, you should have already read Chapter 1. We've completed the lecture on Chapter 1, and you should have already read Chapter 2 on your own before proceeding into this lecture. Appreciate y'all coming back. Again, you by now are starting to understand the format. This particular chapter is going to go into a lot more detail than last chapter, so I would say the last chapter was more kind of theory. This is still some theory, but it's going to give some more core examples. So again, there's actually more slides on this one. And so again, just based on trying to make the best use of your time, I want you to be able to go through this slide by slide. But again, I'm only going to highlight a few of the slides that I really want to talk to. And so again, just to create that atmosphere where you're maximizing your value of your time, my time, and be able to move forward. Just again, continue to look for those icons that have, and kind of in the middle of the screen, that have that record button or that view of a sign that looks like it's a voiceover. Click on that. Again, continue to listen to the full message and then move on to the next one. So glad you're engaged, glad you're here, and we'll continue forward here now. So here again, when we think about the learning objectives, again, we're going to start off by looking at world trade following World War II. World War II brought about a number of different kinds of government changes, world changes, and one of those certainly was the way that we do business or how we can do business. We'll look at balance of payment figures for different countries' economies. We'll look and talk a little bit about protectionism, several types of trade barriers, and certainly provisions of a couple different acts. I'm not going to touch on the next two of two learning objectives, but again, just to kind of frame this up, these are the things that from doing the reading and then also going through some of my points here, you should have a good grasp on. So when we think about trade barriers, just a point that I want to make here, whether it's legislation regarding Pringles being the same potato chip in the UK and causing additional value-added taxes, or P&G and what percentage of California rice can be mixed with the inferior. Again, the point is, there's going to be trade agreements, there's going to be disagreements, there's going to be barriers. But again, it's all about getting down to the facts of the matter, the trueness of any situation, and understanding really what's relevant and what's truthful for that matter. Media, global communications, and technology have allowed world trade to flourish and expand in recent years. When you look at Exhibit 2.1 above, it illustrates world trade and how important it is to economic activity. Increased competition also leads or can lead to increased protectionism. The creation of the World Trade Organization, or WTO, and again, you often probably hear about that. You're hearing about it right now with regards to some of the trade war conversations with Trump and China. It is one of the biggest advancements for free trade among countries. Trade statistics, such as those listed in this above exhibit, have often served to focus the attention of government officials around the world. We should, however, view this data with caution. For example, it's quite clear that China is the United States' biggest trade problem. The imbalance of trade is more than 4 times greater than that with Mexico. However, often U.S. imports from China include a majority of parts made in other countries. A prominent example are Apple's products assembled and imported from China. The iPhone includes parts made in several other countries. A personal example that I'll give you that I've had to be challenged with is a lot of the materials that we move, we are, when you think about fiber and making packaging, we're able to consume like Cedar River in town there. We call it Cedar River, but the plant that we have in Iowa there off of Highway 30 consumes and makes container board, which then gets turned into cardboard box packaging. We've had a number of issues because we also move, and this is more of my role, more of our non-fiber plastic materials, things that aren't consumed. We collect and we're able to ship those, or have been able to ship those back over to China. About a year ago, beginning of 2017, you can look this up, there was a movement that came out called the National Sword. And this was purely policy that the new president of China wanted to engage with to regulate trade in terms of waste products. And it caused and continues to cause a very, very, very hard and strong chain reaction that's negative back to the US, back to Europe, back to other countries that have been shipping in some of their recyclable, sustainable type waste. Ports have shut down. Thousands of containers on route on the ocean have been stopped or turned back. And again, you can just think about the amount of money that's been invested in this process. And then, of course, it's actually caused even finished products, things that were made like from Apple, clothing, shoes, to even be delayed coming to the U.S. as well because of all these issues. So again, it's interesting when something like this comes out from a country when they're trying to put their feet down. And again, that's part of the issue, part of the discussion right now between Trump and them is how do we try to change in policy right now what hasn't been changed or hasn't been addressed over the last 100+ years. And again, he's not a guy that's going to slow down. He's not a guy that's going to think about it too long before making a decision. And when you make a quick decision like this that impacts everybody, it's going to cause definitely some ripple effect. So that's what's going on right now. And just getting a few of my thoughts. But take a look at the data. It's definitely got some relevance to it. So we think about the differences in global marketing. Again, the rapid growth of war-torn economies in previously underdeveloped countries, coupled with large-scale economic cooperation and assistance, led to new global marketing opportunities. These rising standards of living in broad-based consumer and industrial markets abroad create opportunities for American companies to expand exports and investment worldwide. I mean, think about, and I know you all saw this probably in the news late last year, but Amazon, based out of Seattle, wanted to start another headquarters. And so again, when you think about what happened when they were starting their new headquarters, this caused just a lot of change. And you had places like Memphis, Tennessee, Detroit, Michigan, who again are for the most part fairly underserved markets, need higher paying jobs, need stronger education. You saw them step up quickly to say, we'll do whatever it takes to get you here. We need you. And it's no different when Amazon or somebody else like that goes to a foreign country. Again, they're going to just drastically increase the quality of living in those markets because of the work that they're going to bring. One thing to note here is when you think about John Deere, look at that caption around Waterloo, Iowa, and think about how some of those changes have impacted John Deere going around the U.S., but certainly going outside of the U.S. too. I thought that was kind of interesting that nationally this was captured and called out there so close to our home. So here's another graph that I'd like to kind of work out and talk about. And this really focuses on nationality of the world's 100 largest industrial corporations. And again, it's measured in the size of their annual revenues, as you can see there in the caption, and certainly you can see the source. So when you think about the relative importance of the U.S. multinational corporations, or they're considered MNCs, after that World War II declined, when you think about that getting over, you look at corporations and how strong they were, places in Japan, Western Europe, Asia, and many other developing countries such as China and Mexico. This did force the U.S. MNCs to examine new ways to remain competitive from the 60s to 2014. The U.S. moved from being the world's dominant industrial power to accounting for only 34 of the world's 100 largest corporations. And you can kind of see that. And again, there's a gentleman called last name Deming, and he brought a lot of quality controls. Many of you have probably heard of him. And he initially came to the U.S. and wanted to help our automakers improve their amount of quality, reduce waste. This is where Lean, Six Sigma, those types of principles came about. And we kind of turned in the 60s, we turned our nose to him. And so he went to Japan and started working with Toyota. And that's where you started to see Toyota in the late 60s, 70s get advanced and get so much further than us. And we had to take a look to that. And kind of after the fact, we were able to jump in and certainly accept that and try to change the way that we were doing business. Another point I wanted to make is countries once classified as less developed were reclassified as industrial countries. So places like Brazil, Mexico, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong have experienced rapid industrializations in specific industries such as steel, shipbuilding, consumer electronics, automobiles, light aircraft, shoes, textiles, apparel, and more. And I can speak to International Paper. We have probably our fastest growing market segment right now is in Brazil. And it really comes from and stems from the fact that there's really good ship lines that can ship product in and out. We've actually started our own mills there, and cost of living is cheaper there. Labor force costs are a lot cheaper there. And we have the ability again to do our product and do our everything that we develop much quicker, easier, and more cost effectively. So y'all were able to read about the balance of trade within chapter 2 in the book. I just wanted to make a point around trade friction. So when we think about trade friction, it did revolve in this case around Japan's sales of autos and electronics in the U.S. And Japan did have restrictive trade practices in doing so. The United States, a strong advocate of free trade, was confronted with the dilemma of how to encourage trading partners to reciprocate with open access to their markets without provoking increased protectionism. In addition to successfully pressuring Japan to open its markets for some types of trade and investment, the United States was a driving force behind the establishment of the World Trade Organization, or WTO. And so, again, this is something that evolved. And again, you can see the strength also in NAFTA, which oversees a lot of the trading that happens across the world, and APEC as well. And so, all these things started in a lot of ways from the U.S.'s involvement. And again, you see how the United States is anyway. We try to probably get involved with more things than we should, but we try to be that governing body that helps the whole world understand things better, come to better, work alongside each other better too. And that certainly was the case here. So in this slide, I'm going to make a couple points, but you're going to definitely want to reference Exhibit 2.5 in the textbook, as well as Exhibit 2.6. First 2.5, you think and you look back to 1971, the United States has had a favorable current account balance, and that's as a percentage of GDP in only a few years. Again, you can reference that from 2.5. The imbalance, though, resulted primarily from the U.S. demand for oil, petroleum products, cars, consumer durables, and other merchandise. Such imbalances have drastic effects on the balance of payments and therefore the value of the U.S. currency in the world marketplace. And again, that's why that aspect is why you see when you're looking across globally across the ocean, you see that there's different currencies, there's different values to the dollar, and that's because it's very hard for us to all operate under the same currency because we all have different competitive advantages that we want to use, and part of that is our currency. Now in 2.6, Exhibit 2.6, the U.S. dollar strengthened against most of the other major currencies during the 90s, but has weakened during the last decade. And again, a lot of that's due to just the trade disagreements, the imbalance of growth, GDP, so on and so forth across these countries. And again, that continues to, kind of work itself out as well. So this is kind of interesting when we think about what one U.S. dollar would buy, and we're certainly looking at other kind of currencies in other countries. I will make this point, though, as the U.S. trade deficit has increased in magnitude, there is a pressure to devalue the dollar. When foreign currencies can be traded for more dollars, it makes the U.S. products less expensive for foreign customers, and this increases exports. But foreign products become more expensive for U.S. customers. So, again, what they're talking about here is exactly what Trump is arguing and what our government is fighting China on right now is that they have had a competitive advantage over us because of how our dollar values against their product, and vice versa. We have been giving them more trade, giving up more of our trade agreement to them, and giving them more price advantage than we've been taking ourselves. And so there's many that want in the U.S. that want to challenge that right now, and I think are going to see it through. But again, what happens in the future, how that develops, yet to be seen. We'll see what happens. Well, I'm not going to talk about the China example again here, but when you think about protectionism, again, you can read the core definition here. But essentially, it just means that a country believes that whatever it has is more valuable in trade than any other country and what they have in reference to give back to us. And so, again, you're seeing that play out right now in China. A number of years back, we had the same and very similar disagreement with Japan. Since that point, we've been able to work alongside them. Now they're a very close ally. But again, we're going to have to see how things kind of break out. But again, when you think about protectionism in a whole, it's not always a good thing, especially when you think about global economics and trying to do proper trading. Just a brief point I wanted to make here when you think about quotas and import licenses. Example I wanted to give on this is quotas, put an absolute restriction on the quantity of a specific item that can be imported. A while back, Japanese, I believe this was in the late 90s, they had put a restriction on rice that we had going into their country. But since 2000, they opened up the quotas and replaced it with tariffs. So essentially, what they've done is they've said, we will now accept an unlimited amount of rice, whatever you want to ship and whatever we want to buy. However, we are going to put a tariff tax on that. So we're using that as a way to regulate and actually tax your ability to send us that item. And again, anytime you throw money, charge something on top of a product, it is going to cause people to stop and think, well, how much of that do I really want to send when I can potentially send some of the rest of this out somewhere else at a lower overall cost. So something kind of an interesting concept, but something to think about here. An example I wanted to give on this one, boycotts. I think many of us beginning this year watched the Winter Olympics, and we had the leader in North Korea. Obviously, we have some turmoil with him as well. I think that's actually gotten better from that time and from years past. But you remember in the news, Trump and his administration talking about boycotting um, North Korea, and then you actually were able to see China, Japan, some other Southeast Asia countries get involved with that as well. But again, that clearly is the right of any country to do that. And what they're trying to do is it's a diplomacy effort to try to get a country to see things, the boycotting country's way, basically. And when they cut off trade or when they say we're not going to ship this to you anymore, they're basically saying you have to change. You need to see things our way, or you're not going to get access to this product anymore. And that's just a way to kind of tighten um, their viewpoints and tighten the way that we do business with them. So an example I wanted to give here on standards, in the Netherlands, all imported hen and duck eggs must be marked in indelible ink in the country of origin. In Spain, imported condensed milk must be labeled to show fat content if it is less than 8% fat. And in European Union, strict import controls have been placed on beef and beef products imported from the United Kingdom because of mad cow disease. So again, anytime there's change in the markets, anytime one country may have a disease that they're dealing with, or they have something that could be a safety issue, this is where standards and things will be put on those items. Again, not necessarily a tax, but just kind of saying, we got to regulate and watch the type of product that's coming over here to make sure that we don't bring a bad effort into our country. So I wanted to give a little more detail, really around GATT, the WTO, and my understanding and interpretation of this that I want to share with you. The World Trade Organization, like its predecessor GATT, is primarily responsible for regulating world trade and making sure nation states adhere to the rules laid down in trade treaties signed by the WTO members. The WTO is also responsible for facilitating the establishment of additional multinational agreements between WTO members. Excuse me. Over its entire history and that of the GATT before it, the WTO has promoted the lowering of barriers to cross-border trade and investment. In doing so, the WTO has been the instrument of its member states, which have sought to create a more open global business system, unencumbered by barriers to trade and investment between countries. Without an institution such as the WTO, the globalization of markets and production is unlikely to have proceeded as far as it has this far. It is interesting to see the history of the WTO's dispute resolution among countries. If you want to maybe get a little extra credit, if you want to go to, there's a documentary you can view called Banana Wars. The address that I'll just spell out here for you, you can look at it, is going to be http semicolon two forward slashes news.bbc.co.uk forward slash two forward slash hi forward slash business forward slash 8391752 period STM. That was an interesting dispute that was ongoing for over 16 years. And it was just interesting how the WTO and the European Union had to get involved to get that resolved. So I want you to review that if you can. It's not required, but it would be an interesting article for you to take a look at. All right, we are almost finished here, just kind of wrapping up. And again, I appreciate you going through every slide, reviewing it, and then listening to my recordings too. I really do appreciate that. So when we think about protests against global institutions, again, you see a couple pictures, you see a reference to something that actually happened. Beginning in 1999, what some are calling the anti-capitalist protesters began to influence the workers or the workings of the major global institutions such as the WTO. The basic complaints against the WTO, IMF, and others is unintended consequences of globalization, such as damage to the environment, sweatshops, domestic job losses, cultural extinction, higher oil prices, and diminished severity of nations. The protest in Seattle, Washington, for example, in '99 during a WTO meeting got a lot of attention, followed by protests during World Bank, IMF meetings in Washington in '99 and in Prague, Czech Republic in 2000. The protest groups have over time affected policy, and to give an example of that, there was anti-sweatshop campaigns mostly in America and mostly student-led. Those have led or have had efforts beyond college campuses. Given the successes associated with the generally peaceful efforts, it has influenced policies of global institutions, and we do expect, or we can expect, that that same trend will happen in the future. And again, the idea is that, and you see a lot of protesting as well in different ways, but when society as a whole comes together and they see an injustice, they see something that's wrong, it's our God-given right to be able to come together in small groups, large groups across the country and say, we don't agree with what's happening, we don't agree with how you've handled it, and we challenge you, government, or we challenge you, state legislatures or federal legislatures, to figure out a way to make sure this doesn't happen again, or to make it better. So nothing new, nothing different, but definitely something that we need to think about. So we are now done with chapter 2. You guys are getting becoming veterans here and understanding how to do this. Again, I appreciate you staying engaged. Again, as we go forward, when we get done with a full chapter and a lecture, I encourage you to get on the discussion board and wherever it's applicable to start adding some of your comments and your feedback for you to see and learn, but also for the rest of the class as well. It's very important. So thank you all very much, and look forward to chapter 3 coming right up next.